of African accountability mechanisms and the history in Sudan. We have Adejoke Babington Ashai, a senior research fellow at the Sufan Center, focused on legal and criminal justice responses, including in Africa, with a focus on accountability for terrorism, sexual and gender-based violence. She's an expert in international law, justice, and accountability in criminal investigations, and provides training to national criminal justice stakeholders on investigation and prosecution of crimes. She's worked at the World Bank, the International Court of Justice, and the International Criminal Court, bringing a real insider perspective from the highest international institutions. She holds a Doctor of International Affairs and a Master of International Public Policy from Johns Hopkins University and an LLM in Public International Law from LSE. She's a qualified lawyer in New York and is the co-editor of International Criminal Investigations, Law and Practice. Thanks for joining us, Adejoke. Professor Joy Ngozi Azelo is a distinguished law professor and senior advocate of Nigeria with expertise in international law, criminal law, comparative constitution, and the rights of women and children in Africa. Dr. Azelo is Emeritus Dean of the University of Law at the University of Nigeria and a visiting professor at multiple universities. And of course, is a distinguished member of the UN fact-finding mission for Sudan. She's also the founder and director of Women Aid Collective, a Nigerian NGO dedicated to advancing the human rights of women and young people. From 2008 to 2014, she served as the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, and she's received numerous national and international accolades and recognition, including the Nigerian government's Officer of the Order of Nigeria, and a place on the BBC's 2022 listing of 100 women of impact in the world. And finally, Mossad Mohammed Ali is the executive director of the African Center for Justice and Peace Studies. He's a human rights lawyer and conflict resolution specialist, and previously has served as director of the Amel Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Victims of Torture in South Darfur, Sudan. For over 25 years, he's worked against human rights violations in Sudan and has long led peace and justice efforts. In 2006, he was awarded the Olaf Palme Prize for Human Rights, shared with the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. He holds an LLB in law from Cairo University in Khartoum State and a master's in international human rights law from Lund University, and a master's degree in peace and conflict studies from Malmo University. Thanks for bearing with these. We obviously have even longer bios we can go through, but thank you so much for joining us. And just a brief opening. I think a lot of our participants are aware of the extent of the conflict-driven world's largest humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Sudan. And the UN fact-finding mission has found genocide in Al Fashir, in Darfur, crimes against humanity and war crimes more broadly, and that without effective prevention or accountability mechanisms, the risk of genocidal violence remains acute. Most recently in your reports on the hallmarks of genocide and a war of atrocities on civilians before that. So I just want to open up the floor. And I'll address some of these questions. We're hoping for kind of a free-flowing conversation. And I'll just ask some questions, and whoever feels compelled to answer, please step in, or I will direct questions at specific speakers. So first, I just want to ask generally how you view accountability processes as supporting or interacting with the political process. Mossad, I know we don't have you for very long, so perhaps we can start with you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm really very happy to be a part of the discussion. And let me just kick it off with a very quick response to your question, because now I'm asking about the accountability, and also the political dimensions for any potential accountability. For example, when it comes to accountability in general, I think it's really very crucial for the victims as the many stakeholders, to have access to justice, to have this, to have reparation, and also at the same time, also we are seeking to have a kind of social coexistence using any peace initiative. Because by only having sustainable peace that we can make guarantees that there will be some kind of sustainability. I mean, different communities. So the both sides actually are words, but when we apply, for example, this question to the current situation in Sudan, unfortunately, whenever there is a conflict in Sudan, and the conflicts in Sudan actually they have started since the 1950s. Whenever there is any political, if I could say, settlement, they always ignore the side of the justice. Despite the fact that actually, without having justice, it's difficult to have any sustainable peace. So actually, both sides should be connected to each other, and both sides should complement each other. And for that reason, actually, we have been advocating, especially after the 15th of April war in Sudan, that we need to learn from the past lessons, to bring the issue of accountability to the table, and also to ensure that actually there are some kind of political stability, some democratic transitions, but without having both issues, the democratic political transition and also the question of justice and accountability together, we may actually end up at the same first start of all these gradients. So as to make it simple to our question, uh, the actual start point for this, to address all the grievances through all the available mechanisms, whether they are national, regional, or international. Some of them actually might not suit all the cases, but at least actually many of them, especially actually at the national level, made some difference and also made some kind of breakthrough support from the national entities and also the regional and international entities, including even the different African Union mechanisms, whether through the African Union, through the IGAD, through the other human rights African Union mechanisms. So I think all of them would contribute together, to push towards accountability, through the same this mechanism, and also to peace, whether through mediation or through prevention. I mean, whether through the African Commission for Human and People's Rights or even from the African Peace and Security Council, to address the root cause for the violence in Sudan and to have a resolution, or to advocate for accountability, so the African Court or other similar mechanisms. So actually, both of them, they are co-signed. They have to be linked together without separate, the political and the justice from each other.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Masad, for opening us up. And we actually have a representative of one of these mechanisms with us, Professor Azelo. So perhaps I can turn to you for, you know, well, first I want to ask what the nature of your collaboration with the AU fact-finding mission is like. What kind of information sharing, or do you align recommendations together? And what are some of the obstacles that you've faced in your work? Oh, you're just on
Well,
mute. Oh, sorry, this is for Professor
Okay, yeah.
Azela. Yeah.
You can
oh,
hear me
yes,
now.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the question, and importantly for organizing this event as the war is on, and unfortunately entering the fourth year of the war that no one envisaged. And again, for this second high-level informal roundtable being held by the organization. To your question in terms of cooperation, there is a lot of emphasis on complementarity, and part of the opposition to mandates such as ours have also been application. And we're very conscious of it, and our mandate is very clear by the UN resolution in terms of also cooperating with other judicial and quasi-judicial mechanisms. And in that light, we have had, I believe, a robust cooperation with the African Commission, despite some of the challenges. First of all, just from inception, we consulted widely, even before they set up their own fact-finding mission. And since then, the cooperation has increased. Recently, in fact, just last week, 13th of April, 2026, just before the Berlin Conference on Sudan, just to mark the 3 years of the war, we had issued a joint press statement, and that is for us is very important to have agreed on that, to have gone from both sides to have such a joint press statement. Again, we had a side event at the margin of the Human Rights Council session again. And also in the past, we have had several bilateral meetings. We have different mandates because ours have a criminal component, and one have to be mindful of it. And theirs is strictly human rights mandate. So when we make recommendation about international criminal justice and also qualify human rights violations as international crimes, they do not. And we understand that, and that's part of navigating the spaces or margin of appreciation of both mandates. But we support each other, and we work out. We hope that in future we can have more joint statement, because that actually reinforces not just our mandate, but also the importance of the issue of Sudan and the need for accountability and the need to ensure a victim-centered accountability measures are adopted. So we have encouraged people to speak about, to share information, and we constantly share information, and we hope we can even undertake a joint mission. There have been a kind of overlap in our mission that we debrief them as well. So for us, that is important. So far, I can say so that is going on well, and we hope we can always improve on that. Especially, we are so happy that we got this joint statement despite the differences in the mandate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I want to turn to Adejoke now regarding international and regional justice and accountability. What is the level of engagement or orientation of African states towards international criminal justice, and how do we mobilize greater support for these processes? And feel free to also discuss maybe the opportunities for pursuing universal jurisdiction against perpetrators and enablers of atrocities in Sudan.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this very, very important conversation. We are on the heels of what many may seem as a successful conference in Berlin on Sudan, at least in humanitarian terms, with over 1.5 billion, I believe over 1.5 billion euros pledged to address the ongoing catastrophe. And I think it's important to sort of frame discussions around accountability in light of like the broader picture, the political economy of the war and everything, because it's important for us to also stay clear-eyed about what that means. So essentially, we're having pledges to address the ongoing humanitarian crisis, and yet we don't see an end in sight for the very things that are creating the humanitarian crisis. And we've also seen that pledges don't always result in disbursements, and certainly not timely disbursements. We've seen this before. For example, in Yemen, when there were funding gaps and delays that forced the UN to cut food rations in the middle of a famine. And so when commitments look strong in conference halls but arrive slowly for the people on the ground, the question is, how do we translate beyond rhetoric and pledges to actual action that are broad and strategic? So the action that is broad and strategic in the sense of accountability on one end, and in the political aspects of it. And so when we talk about accountability, whether in terms of African countries considering the ICJ option, such as what South Africa did with respect to Israel, or Gambia did with respect to Myanmar, or whether, in terms of support of the ICC, in its own mandates to address individual criminal responsibility, I think we have to broaden our scope also and our understanding of accountability, because yes, judicial mechanisms are extremely important, but it's also insufficient for us to only focus on the direct perpetrators of these crimes. So that's important in whatever way we can do it, whether using universal jurisdiction. So if somebody who is connected to an actor connected to the warring parties happens to go in a country that is disposed towards universal jurisdiction, for example, maybe South Africa or so on, perhaps there is scope there. But beyond that, we also have to think about the indirect perpetrators, and those who are benefiting from the war. And this is where I was talking about that economy of this war. And this is where then I would say recent developments, such as the Lafarge case in France, is actually instructive, and potentially, it's useful for us to be aware of these things. And for those who are not aware, Lafarge, the case concerned a corporation that essentially was paying ISIS to continue, to enable them to continue their own cement operations. And earlier, I believe it was earlier this week or it was last week, the French courts recognized that the corporation and its leadership could be held complicit in crimes against humanity for materially supporting armed groups. And like I said, in that case, ISIS. So this precedent forces a necessary shift in how we can think about Sudan and how we can think about justice, not only focused on those who are the direct actors, but also those who are facilitating the actors, facilitating the wars, benefiting from the wars. And I'll also wrap up there just by also noting that as we think broadly about accountability, there are other mechanisms, including sanctions, asset freezes, and so on. And when we talk about the African Union, to my knowledge, there's no sanction from any other African state, to UN sanctions lists. And that is another scope, another area in which we can actually address and attack the political economy of this war. And finally, though, it is important for us to be cognizant of the political dynamics, right? And I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more about some of the external actors. But the reality is that the complicity in Sudan's war, it exists on a spectrum, right? So you have various countries that are being cited as key transit corridors for arms flows. You have countries that are being cited as having supported one party over the other. And so we cannot ignore the fact that ultimately the African Union is the sum total of its members. And so the extent to which these various means or streams of accountability can actually come to light is limited by the political will of the countries that are part of the African Union.
Thank you so very much, Joke, for the brilliant, comprehensive. I'm glad you're expanding the scope of the discussion beyond traditional, justice options, because we're now, or diplomatic even, because we're now, entering the fourth year of the conflict and things are only escalating. So it's really time to think more broadly, innovatively about how we can stop the violence. So I just want to go back to Professor Azelo, because I know that I wonder if has the fact-finding mission's objectives evolved in terms of what accountability you're looking for. I know that you also mention sanctions and the arms embargo in your reports. Is that a major objective in terms of your of what the impact, the desired impact you'd want to see from the fact-finding reports?
So much. Often, just like you talk about political process, once the political process and negotiation for peace is on, sometimes they put accountability at the back burner. Just like, okay, we just need to get all the parties on board. We need to just have a ceasefire, and then and then maybe later, then we talk about accountability and the measures. And that's a wrong move. And that's why we have been saying in our past recommendation the need to have a victim-centered accountability measures, and even to have interim reparation. So any peace without justice is merely an illusion. And accountability, we have to understand, as you all know, is not a privilege. It's a fundamental human right. And it's one that will hold perpetrators to account. And if you look at the root causes of conflict in Sudan, you will see that lack of accountability has been part of why the cycle of conflict keep erupting. So any peace founded without accountability, without justice, and victims have right to justice, right to truth, right to reparation. All of that is part of what we envisage. So we, first of all, just like you've mentioned, in international mechanism, we are cooperating with ICC, but of course, ICC have limited mandate as far as Sudan is concerned. So part of the recommendation is also to expand it, to the whole of Sudan, so that we're looking at, people cannot say, oh, it's just limited. So expansion of ICC mandate to entire Sudan is very important. Victim reparation, including establishing like victim trust fund, will be very important. So we don't trust really the domestic or the municipal justice system. And of course, SAF have been glorifying this, talking about thousands of prosecution going on, and you can see it's very selective. We don't believe they can address the crimes effectively. First, because they are mainly targeting people from the RSF or perceived collaborators with RSF, and only minor cases do they have from what we have seen on SAF. Yet both sides have committed international crimes, as we know, war crimes and crimes against humanity. So usually for SAFs, they just charge them for like communal crimes, not even something very related to the conflict. So they are targeting mainly the those who are opposing them, and even human rights defenders and journalists. So we believe that it has to be a mix. There must be the international mechanism and regional mechanism. So far, most people so far prosecuted were prosecuted for crimes against the state, but not for international crimes. So that's also, and many are executed even under dubious charges and evidence, and that also reinforces the fact for international mechanism and accountability mechanism to come in. We have shared information with ICC. Part of our mandate is to identify perpetrators, preserve evidence, and then also we're doing that effectively. And our investigators are also on ground doing that. There is a limitation of laws, when you're looking at the justice system. They are also not Sudan, not full cooperation in terms of the Rome status. So for this reason, we believe we cannot leave justice to Sudan or SAF itself with at least the international dimension or assistance. It's not just mere technical assistance, but at least, having that. So that must be on the table, before then. And we've tried to explain in our conference report, CRP, on modalities or modes of what we think accountability, what form it should take. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for highlighting the necessity of regional or international intervention in terms of supplementing. I mean, and filling the void where Sudan doesn't have the capacity. Mossad, I know, I'm aware that you are limited with time, so I want to move a little bit into because you also have expertise in conflict resolution, and can you speak maybe to the prospects of implementing the the African Commission's fact-finding recommendation to deploy a peacekeeping mission to Sudan, consistent with Article 4H of the AU Charter. And there's, just to give a little background, there's also a new framework that from the UN that provides for 75% of UN-assessed contributions for AU-led peacekeeping forces. What is the level of appetite or prospect of getting this off the ground?
Okay, once again, thank you. When it comes to Article 4, actually it's really very complicated, and also to some extent, actually it's very controversial. Simply because, from the very beginning, when the African Union, before the African Union, the African countries, when actually they gathered together to establish, their union, there was really very partial debate about the issue of sovereignty and intervene into each other situations. And this actually has taken a long. But since the establishment of the African Union as such, with its current feature, they have managed actually to overcome all these obstacles. They say that, okay, there is no any limit for this sovereignty, and also there is no any limit for this interference for each other state affairs. Having said that, unfortunately, the issue of sovereignty and also the issue of intervening on each other affairs actually has still one of the major obstacles when it comes, for example, to the conflict resolution within the continent of Africa. Yes, the Attitude Act, which actually regulates, the intervention on other affairs within the African Charter and also within the mandate of the African Peace and Security Council, because the African Peace and Security Council is the responsible body to decide whether there would be any kind of intervention on any situation within the countries who have voluntarily been part of the African Union and who have voluntarily accepted to be part of the African Charter. Actually, they have to accept, such a mandate. And here I'm just talking as a theory. But when it comes, for example, to the practice, there's a huge difference. And I think this is one of the very controversial issues within the African mechanisms of resolving conflicts, of making peace, of even keeping peace. All these things actually, all of them, they are just move around this issue of interference on others' affairs.
Yeah.
Having said that, the African Union, they have been doing their best, to manage a number of very complicated conflict zones situations in Africa, including even in Sudan. And here, maybe I can just take you back to the situation in Sudan in early 2000s, when the Darfur issue has just pressed, to the global, not only to the African continent, but even to the global, because after Rwanda, because Rwanda was like a great failure even to the international community, but like less than a decade, there was another challenge for the international community and regional community as well in Sudan and in Darfur. And that was really very challenging, even for the African Union protective and preventive mechanisms. They have utilized, their available resources. I'm saying about the legal resources, financial resources, and otherwise, and they sent troop keeping mission to Darfur in early 2005, 2006. Because it was the only regional mechanism available at that time. And also for the government of Sudan during that material time as well, because they have been rejecting any Western intervention in their own internal affairs to avoid any kind of colonization. Okay, so they have accepted. I mean, the government of Sudan, they have accepted, the deployment of the African Union peacekeeping missions in Sudan. But unfortunately, their mandate was very limited because actually they cannot make any use of force. Their only mandate was just to monitor the ceasefire between the two warring parties. So they can't make any use of force. Besides, the financial constraints and besides, the technical, all these things, and that's why actually even their mandate has been changed a year after, to have, this hybrid deployment, with the United Nations and the African Union, and they have changed from the African Union mission to the UN African Union mission deployed in Darfur. So theoretically speaking, the African Union, in terms of theoretical, within the charter, within the mandate of the Peace and Security Council, they have the mandate and also they have all these things, to make breaking through in any difficult situation that requires their intervention. And this is like a fact. But in practical, actually, it's really very difficult. Mm-hmm. Because every now and then, they need to seek some support actually from the external actors, whether European unions, whether the Americans, whether the United Nations. That has happened actually as lessons learned. Now, in this situation which we are facing right now in Sudan after the 15th of April 2023, the African Union has to play, the leading role in managing, in making, and also in building the peace in Sudan. But unfortunately, they didn't manage actually to break through all these things. Yeah, I do understand that there are so many challenges because even, the actors, when it comes, for example, in terms of the mediation, and here I just want to jump, from your question, to the other side of the mandate of the African Union, because for them, I mean, the African Union, it is not only like a preventive body, but also, they could act as a mediative body when it comes, for example, to the prevention, so they can start their intervention from the early stage of each conflict. Okay, they have given the chance. They have given the chance, to play that role, to mediate. But unfortunately, they couldn't make it because, yes, one of them because of their capacity. So we have to acknowledge that one. But also maybe the multiple platforms when it comes to the situation in Sudan. Because actually the African Union, they are still very fragile entity, if I could say, because they are still relying, even in their funding, to the external donors. Like 90% of the finance of the African Union actually comes from the external partners. Mm-hmm. Whether European Union, whether American, whether others, etc. And this is maybe also one of the things that actually make even their ability, to intervene and make change, very limited. Okay, this is not a question. So maybe you can just go back to the main question.
Yeah. Well,
Would you like to say anything before I just come? I feel as if you have a follow-up question.
oh yes, I just wanted to. I'll come right back. But did you want to finish your thought about to wrap it up?
Okay. Let me just wrap up and finish this one.
Okay. Oh, we might have lost you. Oh no. Um, okay, we'll wait for Musa to reconnect. But I also want to acknowledge we have my colleague Mutassim Ali here. Thanks for joining. I didn't know if you were able to, but I don't know if you want to share some words as well.
Well, I mean, for most part, I'm here listening, but really honored to join you all, the Joke and Professor Zilio and Professor Graham side. And I think you really highlighted key issues here, and that is the the relationship between ending violence and the peace process. Oftentimes, as Professor Zero highlighted, peace without justice and accountability is an illusion. And the history of Sudan demonstrates this clearly. We have record peace agreements that have been signed. And in many of those peace agreements, there were provisions on accountability and justice. But because the nature of agreements are always bilateral, transactional, and so accountability has always been sidelined. And so just to copy your thoughts on that, a transactional peace agreement or a peace agreement without accountability and justice is sort of delaying violence to future, sort of an appeasement rather than resolving the conflict. Now, I'm quite disappointed in the role of the African leadership, not only as an organization, African Union and its entities, but also African states individually. For most part, many of Sudan's neighbors, to a certain extent, play a big role in enabling the atrocities. I mean, if we say, the African Union is fragile and they lack the resources to end the violence, at least Sudan's neighbors could have limited the access to flow of arms and other material sort of support to groups committing atrocities. In fact, many of these states are complicit. And that is really where the disappointment is. And just, I don't want to talk a lot because this is really yours, but I think the dilemma that we're facing right now, not only the accountability itself, because we know that, accountability and justice takes time, and we have to continue to document. And that is expectation that everybody should bear in mind. And I think the priority right now is where is the role of the African leadership in terms of arresting the violence? Basically, how do we stop this violence? Just a couple of days ago, the fact-finding mission, both the joint African Union, African Commission on Human Rights fact-finding mission, and then the UN fact-finding mission as well, issued a statement saying there's like a heightened risk of atrocities. In other words, that we will continue to see, and perhaps will be a witness, another Al-Fashir or another Al-Junaina and the like. And therefore, we have to do something to stop what will transpire. And here, I just want to throw sort of an idea for all of you to reflect on. we know that many of the efforts to sort of broker a ceasefire between the warring parties, national ceasefire, really haven't sort of succeeded at all. And I don't see that as a practical thing at the moment. For both warring parties believe that they could win the war, or actually they're completely comfortable with the status quo, because they're the status quo is profitable for them. But also, I'm mindful of the failure of the international, maybe the lack of appetite to send protection mission. And so whether there is an opportunity, now that's really the question, to explore some local mechanisms to end violence, whether through brokering sort of localized ceasefires, local arrangements with local communities, and armed actors in regions where there's a high propensity for mass atrocities, and whether that will be sort of an opportunity to engage the African leadership, the African Union, and African states to broker sort of local sort of arrangements, at least to hold atrocities temporarily as we continue to pursue a nationwide cessation of hostility. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Mutassim. Professor Azelo or Joke, did you want to respond or add to this?
I think Mutassim has made a very, very important point, and all of this add to the fact that we can no longer we can no longer ignore the international community, the calls for accountability, but importantly also the necessary reforms and things that need to be in place, and in this way with the legal and institutional reforms that is needed, but importantly also for those who are aiding or the external actors, that they also they should be also they know that accountability will extend to them. They will not also outrun justice with regard to this, and we have seen from the case, the Lafarge case, which is also a cement company operating in Nigeria and is quite big, that this having implication. For us as a mission, we have been engaging because people have been, wanting us to name them publicly and everything, but we have identified all of the external actors and we have written communication, direct communication to them, and we have engaged and sat in rooms with them, addressed the issues for which we think they are responsible, and we will be also putting this together and making our report official. During the last Geneva, we met quite a number of them. We have met the ones that are even acting as mercenary from other countries far away, as far as Colombia, and they've given their perspective and governments have taken action. Other accused persons, we are engaging. And it's very, very important to just know that we are fact-finding a mission. We establish, the issue of clear mandates to investigate and establish facts, circumstances, and the root causes of alleged violations, including, so we make sure that we have our facts. So that's why we are specifically and directly engaging with them, not first maybe just joining and naming them, but we want to get our fact, and we're saying this is what we have already. What do you have in defense, for this? So the issue of because for Sudanese, they are just losing faith in the international community. They've lost faith in the domestic system, and we want to also ensure that accountability is victim-centered. I was in Gorom camp in Sudan, in South Sudan, in settlement in this January. Our team is also still in South Sudan, and it's so painful to see that people are not even being documented, and they've been in the camp for which about 90% also are Sudanese in the camp that have fled even the El Fasher. And some of the women who are victims and survivors. So sometimes I find it difficult to call them survivors because they have not been any intervention with regard to the case. They have not received psychosocial support. They've not received medical. They have not even no immediate or interim reparation of any kind. And yet they cannot even be documented because there is no money. And the UNHCR documenting them means that they will be entitled to certain things, and of course they don't have. So they just stop recording, some of the, recording some of the refugees, and that's so painful because, and of course, we know the challenges these days with the UN, with the cash flow, with the which also impacted also us even in our work, especially in taking off and staffing our secretariat. It's still a battle because people come and go. It's still every day a battle, and to do work and do important work, we all have to tax ourselves, even as experts. We don't earn money, and we're supposed to, put in certain amount of time. We go over and above that in order to make sure that the work doesn't suffer in any way. So the breakdown in rule of law in Sudan amid the ongoing conflict has compounded and provides serious gap in any domestic accountability system, so that cannot be relied on. And for the mission, we're also concerned about, political leaders, of course, as they are negotiating peace, and ceasefire is very important. We are calling for ceasefire, but there must be broader consultation. All of the Sudanese people will have to be involved. And in looking at what form, we have to also see what lessons have been learned from the past transitional justice and accountability mechanisms. Because if we don't look into that, we'll fall into the same problem. Because why is it that this is happening over and over? This is another aspect of our work we are deepening now. Because that root causes, okay, look at those who have been indicted and they're still not working free. Some of them are there even now before ICC, they are not. So how do we get them to be accountable? So because this is what is making people lose faith that this will not work. Look at the issue of what happened in El Fasher, that perpetrators are so emboldened and people will commit such heinous crime, video themselves, they video the thing and they put it out there. So that's the level of decadence. And we're seeing this not just in El Fasher, we're seeing this in Kordofan region, which is another fear that is brewing. So the regional also implication of this entire conflict, as we're seeing in Africa, means that AU and UN will have to cooperate a lot, and we're seeing that, and I think they are mindful of that. And we're also happy that the Berlin conference have come with some sort of support in terms of humanitarian aid, because this is also important. We talk of justice, accountability. There must be also some interim measures that can bring reparation and relief to those who are victims and survivors of the civilian population that are affected or hugely affected by the conflict. So the viable path is to justice and accountability for the atrocities committed is part of what we also covered in our September report, extensively following the consultation we have with the ICJ and then all of the Sudanese stakeholders in that. And I think that's also, we are still aligning ourselves with that. And we think, like Muntasim emphasized, we still need to continue to document. Yes. And for civil society to document, continue to document violations, preserve evidence for future accountability, and to advocate for impartial justice and genuine accountability. But if you don't document, because sometimes people feel frustrated, for civil society, human rights defenders, what should we do? Haven't we? No, you haven't. We can't stop documenting the violations, because these are the evidence that will be required, that will be needed, for prosecution and successful prosecution of these cases. And where they require capacity to continue to document in an effective way, in a way that serves justice, then we need to get those technical assistance to them, give them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Azelo, for your very honest reflection. We're really grateful, and despite the challenges you face, to still manage to have such an outsized impact and on a UN body is really admirable. So it's just an honor to hear from you. And Joke, I wanted to go back to you because I really thought you made such a crucial point about looking at, piercing through, the veil of the more powerful actors involved, and looking at what other accountability options are there? I mean, and also highlighting how we just had it's because it can be frustrating sometimes to see um, countries make pledges, or even for countries to just talk about going after commanders vaguely, kind of talking about going after perpetrators without really talking about the flow of arms and the war economy that are sustaining the atrocities, and the real players who are also happen to have a seat at the table of the Quad, for instance. You know, we're talking about Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the US, all actors without exactly the Sudanese um, civilians' interests in mind, and even worse, are enabling and acting as complicit. So I want to ask maybe what other forums do you believe that we need to kind of and uh, bring this to political actors, and how do we change the conversation, or do you believe that that these international institutions should be looking into the criminal or even, otherwise responsibility for arms suppliers abroad? How do we go after more effectively? And I'm also grateful to hear from Professor Azela that the fact-finding mission has been privately engaging and is going to release a report on this. But it really is something that needs to be centered, I think, because it's a root cause and it's a but-for cause of violence, because without the capacity to commit atrocities, they cannot commit atrocities. So, yeah, I just want to hear your further thoughts on this, Adejoke, and how do we, yeah, really get the higher level political discussion to, and or the international criminal justice process to look into this.
Thank you. Okay, so before I jump into that, so I want to touch on some of the other really excellent points that have been made. For example, Mussad's point addressing Article 4H, and that is one of the most, I would say, progressive norms in global regional security governance, right? Having the AU having the right to intervene in a member state when there are cases of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. And so if something actually does happen, it provides that provision provides a legal and moral basis for deploying a protection force in Sudan. However, as he also very rightly noted, all the various challenges. And one key point he mentioned was about, the sovereignty issue, but also there's a fear of setting a precedent. So precedent setting intervention under Article 4H, where by authorizing this, by AU member states authorizing this in Sudan, there could be a future conflict that could impact them themselves. So these are things that we always have to think about that make such a great recommendation politically difficult. And as such, it may not see the light of day. If it does, that'll be wonderful, but it may not see the light of day. Also, in terms of understanding, as he also mentioned, the fact that you may have something broad, but ultimately having to be limited because of the various, whether it's operational factors, funding factors. And so we also have to think that a peacekeeping mission, what peace? What peace will it be keeping? We don't actually have any viable or concrete ceasefire, and there are several actors that it's in their own interest to continue this war, as Mutesen was just saying. And so the sobering truth from all of that is that for as long as war remains profitable, it will continue. Like, we just know this when we see other wars. So then the question is, how do you make it less profitable? How do you make it difficult for them to continue? And so this goes back to my point about strategically thinking about accountability, where you're not just focused on the direct actors, you're focused on indirect, but you also focus on banking systems that are financing, that are facilitating. And this is where I would say we then, look broader, because it's important to reframe the war in Sudan. Because right now, if we listen to how, it's being portrayed in the media for over the last 3 years and over the time that all the various forms of war have occurred in Sudan, it's framed as if it's basically this insular thing where Sudanese are fighting themselves, or it's like an ethnic thing. But let's be real, where we look at the fact that there are various actors, some of them have been named already, and it's well documented that various states are complicit. basically we're seeing an international war being fought on the bodies of Sudanese people. So if we reframe this, then we begin to understand that justice and accountability is not only focused on how do we get justice and accountability in Sudan, are the mechanisms in Sudan good enough, or can we get the ICC to focus on the Sudanese? No, we have to think broadly. We have to look at companies in Europe that are facilitating this. Can they be held responsible in European courts? Can civil society and, of course, regular civilians, because this is also the challenge for everyday folks who are hearing these things, it feels very overwhelming. But what can you do in terms of lobbying your own political systems to basically say, no, we're not going to keep supporting this war because we have all this evidence showing that our country is actually facilitated and supporting this war. So when we begin to reframe it, how we talk about it in the media, how we talk about it in our civil society reports, we begin to see that the dimensions are a lot broader, and then also perhaps the avenues for some form of justice and for some form of change are actually greater than we may initially think. So that is what I would share in that respect.
Yeah, thank you so much. All really crucial points, and I really love how you're bringing us back, grounding us in what our our audience can do from wherever they're watching, and how they can put pressure their own governments to think about their involvement. We have a question from the audience. Maybe I will. It's a bit long, but a question about what opportunities does civil society have to work with prosecutors and courts? So diaspora communities having direct access to survivor testimony and documentation networks, and legal systems with genuine enforcement capacity. The question is about the institutional will to work with civil society. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on this?
I don't get what exactly is the content, but if it's about what role the civil society can play, or is it the diaspora community? Of course, there is a lot both sides can do. We know that this war on Sudan has also been a lot of attacks on civil society, human rights defenders, and a lot of them have fled the country, and a significant number of them also in diaspora and doing their work from there. And if it's also about, because I think I had mentioned, I had the question read about how to prosecute or get involved, or be involved or be useful. I think documentation is one, and then people can, if called, if they have substantive evidence that is verifiable, and that's why documentation is very important, credible information. Why not? They can be part of in terms of giving testimony, being a witness, that is also possible at individual and institutional level for civil society. But then, of course, that's part of what we do in our investigation, in verifying this information and preserving this evidence. And a lot of it also comes from human rights defenders, from civil society, that we collect some of this information. So it is an area ongoing, and the work that can go on with the support of people in diaspora, because some of these human rights defenders, they need, even where they are now, refugee camp, they need a lot of support to survive, daily, and to do their work. And with increasing decline in funding, most of them lack this support. And this is very important that we continue to mobilize support. I've had to, even on my own, talk to some organizations. Can you support this group? Can you? And we have seen groups even closed that are working on Sudan simply because they don't have the money. And then also those who are providing the critical services that is required for women, for other children, women also who are victims of SGBV, cannot also be able to provide those. So these are areas that we have to find innovative ways, supporting, so that we can have alternative sort of funding that can support some of this crucial and critical work that is being done by Sudanese people and Sudanese organizations, including those that are in diaspora or in settlement, in and around the surroundings of Sudan.
Thank you so much, Professor. That brings me to, I just, that brought something up for me in terms of, there's obviously a competition over funding in this space in general, but there's also, as Joke mentioned, a little bit of an opacity around how funds are distributed from, this over $1.5 billion worth from governments. Likely the vast majority, I mean, I really don't know enough to know how or whether this will actually, to what extent it'll be fulfilled, and which international organizations get the money, or whether it's grassroots organizations that are receiving it. But I'd like to hear our thoughts in general. Maybe you'll start with you, Joke, about how do you view this? Because on the one hand, you do have organizations and actors working on the more root causes, sort of like the UN fact-finding mission, or others even working on enforcing the arms embargo or stopping the flow of arms, pushing the political process, and then of course the immediate needs on the ground. And is there a way maybe that you think about the balance here, or how we can ensure that funds are most effectively being used? I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Thank you. That I think it's a really important and valid concern, that has come up if we think of other humanitarian situations where there has been a concern about the extent to which the funds, if actually dispersed from pledges, get to those who are directly impacted. And so I love what Professor has been sharing thus far about the importance of a victim-centered approach. And so when we think beyond accountability and even to the question of humanitarian assistance, it has to be focused on, it has to center the victims. And to that end, then, because, for example, you have many organizations that indeed might have great programmatic content for the support of victims. However, even funding, donations, and things like that, a huge portion goes to operations, right? And so that is a problem if, 80% of whatever they get goes to operations and then only 20% actually goes to the programmatic content. So having some kind of transparent process in terms of who the funding goes to, how it's managed, monitoring, and so on is important. I don't know enough about existing structures in Sudan or elsewhere to be able to say which organization is better and so on, but I would just say in terms of setting some kind of framework to ensure that whatever is being pledged ultimately goes to the benefit of those who are the victims of the crimes that are happening in Sudan. So certainly centering the victims, like I said, grassroots-led, would be extremely important.
Professor Zilo, do you have any thoughts on this, or can you add to this?
You mean on how the funding, the Berlin, the pledge that has been made? Yes, I think there must be a way to make sure that it gets to local groups, local organizations, that it also gets to where it's needed. We see that critical infrastructure, of course, they can't start funding that, but you see that some infrastructures have been attacked, and then telephone, even internet and all of that are not what people have access. But beyond that, hospitals, are very, very also important in terms of those civilian population that are affected getting the support they need. But of course, I think for UN agencies that provide support, because think of also countries that border Sudan, some of them have been overwhelmed by the influx of refugees from, for example, Chad. We've gone around Chad, and there is a competition of fund. Obviously, a bit of displeasure in terms of other international agencies working there, and funds may be meant for to be used in country also being used also to cater for the refugees. We've had this type of complaint over and over as we travel around Chad, Uganda, Kenya, and is also a concern to be noted. And people will ask, how will is there any support for some of these countries? But of course, if they are implicated in other ways, to what extent? So sometimes it's very it can also be complicated because some of them have been accused of aiding, either through allowing weapons to pass through there, or but then that does not take away the humanitarian crisis that is on ground, and ensuring that that kind of a support is also provided to make sure that it gets to the people that it needs. But there is urgent need that it gets to the local groups, to local organizations who are doing the work. It is important that they are factored in. And I hope that some of these pledges wouldn't go, because people say, okay, we talk of peacekeeping. If there is a ceasefire and then there has to be peace has to be maintained, that some of this money may be what, for example, African Union may agree to things, but we always know that there is always economically, when it comes to financial contribution, then it's down. And then it will have to rely on some of the pledges in order to function. And if that is the case, and then if there is any military, a peace mission, then some of this money might also go to that. But we see. What we need, yes, ceasefire is very important. None of this side can win this war, even though they all think they can win this war by militarily. But we know that it is impossible for any of this side to win this war militarily. And then it must end in negotiation table. And in that negotiation table, all sides will have to be represented, age, gender, different groups, different ethnic groups. They all have to, women have to be on that peace table. Accountability will have to be on that peace table, because a peace without that justice and without that accountability is no peace. And that's important. Absolutely.
And thank you, Professor. I just want to, I'd be remiss not to, because the question was much longer. It's from Abir Mustafa, and it's quite technical, so that's why I didn't read the whole piece. But I want to just say, he talks also about how Sudanese victims don't have access to the African Court on Human and People's Rights, because Sudan also has never ratified the court's protocol, so a little bit of a technical detail. Or made the declaration required to allow complaints. And so the only African Regional Human Rights Court is structurally closed to them. I think it's a really important point. And so the sole alternative is this, the African Commission. But those don't produce binding relief, just political resolutions. So for Sudanese survivors, he's saying that the African human rights system is a witness, not a remedy. I think that's a very important point. And so from that, he was asking, can Sudanese diaspora fill this accountability gap through accountability elsewhere? I also just, I want to maybe go back to Joke quickly about the International Court of Justice, because I know you have some experience there. And is the International Court of Justice, does it provide an avenue for relief for Sudanese victims? What would be an ideal scenario for the ICJ to take on a case, and what should states know that the viability of taking a case to the ICJ?
So thank you for that. So the ICJ's jurisdiction is basically state to state. So before a case can even come before the ICJ, it basically would then need another state to bring the dispute to the ICJ, alleging that in this case, it would be the state of Sudan, as represented by its government, alleging that that state is violating, whether it's, again, back to the questions like what framework is used. So if we're saying genocide is occurring, then is violating the Genocide Convention or violating certain principles of international law or some other treaty that it may have signed. And so using that as a basis to then trigger the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. So that's the very first step. And so, of course, we saw what happened, like I mentioned earlier, alluded to earlier, with South Africa and Israel, or Gambia and Myanmar, where you then have a state bring in another state to say you are violating these principles. And then it goes through the entire process. Unfortunately, it's not the shortest of processes before the ICJ, so it does take some time. I think it's symbolic indeed. If a state were to do it, it doesn't have to be an African state that takes Sudan. That, of course, only focuses on one actor, however, right? Because we know in this situation, there are multiple actors in this, and the RSF as a non-state actor would not, the ICJ will not be able to have jurisdiction over the RSF. However, there's nothing stopping someone from, if you have those links and the evidence to demonstrate that another state is financially supporting RSF, and then to bring that state to the ICJ using whatever is the necessary legal mechanism to argue that by supporting the RSF that is documented to have been committing genocide and documented committing all these war crimes and crimes against humanity, that state in itself is also complicit in that. So that's sort of like the way that one possible way that it could go. At the end of the day, with all of these things that we're saying, it boils down, sadly, to political will. Because all these various legal mechanisms are there, the strategic, to do strategic litigation, whether in domestic courts, internationally, or in other countries, to push for universal jurisdiction, or to contemplate the possibility of ICJ, a case at the ICJ, they're there. But the question is, who is going to bring that case? Is there any will to bring that case? Which country, which African country is going to bring the case against Sudan, or against UAE, or against whoever else is considered involved in this? So that I think is the challenge. Now, will an ICJ decision ultimately have like will it have any benefit for the civilians? We can look at the case of South Africa brought against Palestine, where you did have interim measures, and according to those interim measures, there were certain things to be put in place, right? Where the government of Israel was supposed to ensure humanitarian access and so on. Now, that is important to have that judicial document that says this. However, as we can also see, there is a huge problem with implementation. So that then becomes another thing. So even if you have that strategic, a state finally decides to take that strategic mantle to go to the ICJ in order to hopefully get the ICJ to issue this interim measure compelling, humanitarian access cessation to allow the civilians to be protected, who is going to implement it? Right. So I don't want to sound as though, like as I'm speaking, I'm saying, oh, how sad. It doesn't seem to be any real avenue, but it's just the reality. So on the one hand, it's a great idea. And on the other hand, how can it actually be implemented?
Yeah, well, thank you for really summing that up perfectly in such a short period of time. We're also, as a center, very involved in trying to move a state to bring this case. So just as a plug, sort of what we've been doing as well. And if I can maybe pose a question for Mutassim, that we have you. And I really appreciate you saying that, Joke, about the value and the pros and cons of, you do have this judicial, if there were to be judicial provisional measures, that could still be used effectively as a tool for diplomats in behind closed doors and in the media, and of course there is that reservation that the UAE has to the Genocide Convention, which lawyers will talk about, which we've considered very kind of silly and technical, and not a reason to overlook essential justice at the World Court. But anyways, that's for a longer discussion. And so Mutassim, I want to ask, are there legitimate bodies representing civilians in Sudan? And if international actors were to recognize something like Takadum or Samud, would that be an effective substitute? I know that also the AU has suspended Sudan its membership because of this, because there's no civilian representation. But during the war, would that signal, would that potentially accelerate the peace process?
I'll try to make it really brief. This is actually the issue of legitimacy is at the heart of the Sudan conflict. This is also part of the reason why the coup in October 2021 happened in the first place. And I just want to note that there, it seems like there is like a question from the audience, so I'll be really brief. But
I think we've addressed it.
Yeah, I will worry about endorsing a particular group as a representative of the Sudanese people. At the moment, Sudanese are really, really divided, and I think fairly so. This conflict really, in addition to the massive sort of destruction that we see, there's like an invisible destruction, which is the sort of really profound division among the Sudanese people along ethnic, geographic, and political lines. And therefore, I think the focus of the international regional community should be less on who's the, sort of a true legitimate authority representing the Sudanese people. Instead, they should focus more on, providing a platform for the Sudanese people to sort of, to debate their issues. I think Sudanese people will have to have that eventually, and that can happen, as we continue to pursue an end to violence, right? And I think the Quintet and other sort of African mechanisms are doing that, and I guess that should be sort of reinforced. But the question is legitimacy is really complicated, and I don't think it is wise for the international or regional community to grant that to any of the groups in the country. Over.
Thank you. Thanks, Mutassim. And I think, thank you everyone for engaging and giving us your time today. We have a lot to think about and feeling even more motivated. And I know that our audience really benefited so much. And, we're all kind of in this together. So it also feels, it's comforting to have this discussion. I guess I want to open up for any final word from our speakers before.
I feel there is one in the audience, Nuri, I think, raising a hand. I don't know if you would like to take that on or.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see this.
Yeah.
Can we? I don't know if they can only type out the question. Because I don't know if they have access to be featured as a speaker.
Yeah.
But if you can type out your question, Nuri, that would be great. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, I would love to give you a final opportunity for any comments that our discussion has brought up, Professor Azilo or Joke.
No.
Well, thank you so much. This discussion is very important and is one that is good that we're putting it out there, even ahead of ceasefire, and then to make sure that the political process that is also carried along. In terms of, yes, I had Martina spoke about, Mutassim, about the issue of the divide or polarization in Sudanese community, and that is real. And it means that you have to broaden participation. There can be one just group or handpicked groups representing the others. You have to think of all of those dimensions that are part of the disparate interest, and then that comes into contention, both gender, both groups, both age, both regions, and making sure people are involved, because the divide is so rife now. It is even making it even more compounding the problem. But again, it also means that, and this is actually what is required, that there is a broad consultation with citizens' participation across all all divides. And again, in looking at options for accountability and justice, we have to think of something, whether fully international, regional, hybrid, but definitely not domestic alone, because we have seen Sudanese people don't have faith in that. Again, it will not work. The capacity is not there. It's also selective justice, and we need to make sure that is robust and that there are not those who are sacred cows or who cannot run it. And we'll continue to advocate for the expansion of the mandate of ICC to cover the whole of Sudan, and then also the arms embargo. The war economy is also something that has come out clearly, and in that war economy, accountability is very crucial, because that also is fueling and exacerbating the conflict. And that's why, and those have to be brought in, that they must also be held accountable. So the complementary, independent, and impartial judicial system, in Sudan, so that can decide cases, like certain cases at national level, definitely that wouldn't be a problem. But access to justice, we've all agreed, is important, and I believe interim. We have to also think of interim reparation. We don't have to wait until the war ends, especially with some of this support and from Berlin Conference and pledges. Can there be something set out that can, in the interim, just really help those who are deeply affected and really are in need and of certain care that they must also get. I thank you again for this conference, and I think there was a question that was asked that I couldn't, of course, answer, not in this forum, but somebody is saying, how come, is it part of the African solidarity, which I've also criticized in other measures, when they talk about they oppose our mandate, for example, the Sudan wouldn't let us come in because they opposed our mandate from beginning, and they talk about African solidarity, that these institutions are like targeted against them. But someone is saying, how come it's only Africans? South Africa has gone to ICJ for against Israel. Gambia has also gone for Myanmar. Which African country will take on African country? We take on this issue of Sudan and bring it also before ICJ. So we are waiting, but we think that solidarity must be with the people of Sudan, not solidarity that encourages impunity, for countries to take on their people, and then we think we can all fold our hands and not intervene. I mean, that's not the world that we live in today. No one can outrun justice, and that demand, we must keep raising that accountability stake high and higher. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Such an honor to have you and hear from you, and for your passionate participation. I just want to, maybe if we have a quick moment, can we give the floor 2 minutes to, because I know our audience have been, patiently watching, and there is one request to make a quick comment. So, Jeremy, if you can allow Nouri to speak just for 2 minutes, is that all right? Let's see. Okay, I think Nouri, I think you have access now. Yeah. But keep it quick if you can, because we're just wrapping up. Sorry.
Yes. Thank you very much, Jonah. I don't see myself on the screen, but I guess you can hear me though?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because it looks like here I'm muted.
No, we're here. Yeah.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Right. My name is Nouri Abdallah. In fact, I am originally from Darfur. I have pretty much lived my whole life in Darfur and went to school in Sudan. But over the years, I've been involved in the issues of Sudan and the issue of Darfur when it came up in the 2006, 2007, 2005. We worked with the Canadian government and the Honorable Mubina Jaffer. In fact, at the time, she was the Canadian Special Envoy to Sudan at the time, and we helped pushing Paul Martin's government to become the biggest donor for any humanitarian crisis, actually, at the time. But to go back to the topic, in fact, I was also an active participant during the Abuja peace talks, where the African Union was taking on the mediation efforts between the Sudanese government and the Darfur armed groups. And also I was an active participant during the Doha peace agreement as well. And in fact, the issues of Sudan, we always look at them, we take them as isolated incidences, the Darfur issues and problems back in 2004, 2005, and now we're looking at the current war and we're looking at it as an isolated event. As a matter of fact, the issues of Sudan, there is an elephant in the room. A lot of people don't talk about it. It's not addressed, but it is, in reality, is quite essential to understand the political project that is led by, everybody in Sudan knows, the Islamic movement and the Muslim Brotherhoods who are behind all of this. The war, the current war didn't just start in 2023, nor did it start, in fact, in 2003. So basically, so we have a culprit. I will make it quick, Jonah.
Thanks.
Right. So, but let me jump in, since I have a lot to say about this. Let me jump to the issues of accountability and also the documentation. And some of you guys have actually mentioned the importance of documenting any atrocities that may have been committed by the warring factions. These, in a war, we have two warring factions and there are no angels here. So to portray one party as a party that committed the heinous crimes and the other one did not, and in order to have a complete accountability, selective accountability always reinforces impunity, which in reality, in fact, fueled this Sudanese conflict for decades. So documentation should be balanced. We should hold both parties accountable. People talk about al-Fashir. This war isn't only about al-Fashir. No, issues happen in Al-Junaina, issues happen in central Sudan, where people from an African origin were slaughtered in Al Jazeera state, in Khartoum, suburban Khartoum. There is Mayo, there is Arkawi, there is places, all these, but the real culprit is in the room using both, in fact, both Arab and non-Arab tribes alike as instruments to help them stay in power. If we don't address this issue from this perspective, we will be circling around and we will be in this vicious cycle forever, and the issues of Sudan will never be resolved. We need to confront the issues of Sudan head on, go to the roots of the issues of Sudan and solve them from the roots, or otherwise we will be circling around into this vicious cycle. And thank you very much, Jonah, and thank you to the center. And I'll be in touch with you.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we can continue the conversation offline. Okay, excellent. Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks, Nouri. Yes. And Professor Azilo, can I ask, do you have an estimated release date for your next report you mentioned on the external actors?
Is it for the external actors? No, not yet. But in June it's more oral. But certainly in our CRP, it will be part of it. Maybe before September. September.
Thank you so much. Joke, did you want to say anything to close this out? Or?
Yes, just to reiterate what Professor said, thank you very much for hosting and organizing this very, very timely and important conversation. From my perspective, what I would just add, my final 2 cents, going back to the importance of broadening our understanding of accountability, ensuring that everything is, we're not just focused on certain actors, but we're thinking broadly, also reframing, like I said earlier, our narrative about the conflict, because the current reframe allows certain indirect actors to sit on international platforms and call for peace and call for ceasefires and call for protection of civilians, but then at the same time are complicit in funding, complicit in elongating the war. So rethinking accountability, rethinking the war itself, I think could be a path towards hopefully, ideally, an outcome that is most importantly beneficial for the people of Sudan. Thank you again.
Thank you, Joke and Professor. And Mossad, thanks for coming earlier. Sorry to have lost you earlier in the conversation. This has been, I think, the best webinar we've hosted yet to date. So I'm really pleased, and yeah, I look forward to continue all working together. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.